Welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! History with Joe Giorlando. In today's video, we are going right back to the summer of 2007 and taking a look at one of the most requested deck profiles, Demise OTK. Demise OTK is an interesting deck because it was technically legal at the Shonen Jump Championship in Houston, but it had very little success. It wasn't until the subsequent event in Columbus, Ohio, that we started to see Demise OTK decks profiled on old coverage sites and take top 16 slots. Demise OTK would later go on to win a Shonen Jump Championship in California, placing 3 copies into the top 8. Demise OTK is an OTK deck based around Advanced Ritual Arts, a new card released at the beginning of the summer of 2007, I guess technically the spring of 2007, a card that when combined with Demise King of OTK enabled you to produce OTKs primarily using normal insect monsters and then other cards like Doomdozer, Metamorphosis, Megamorph, Premature Burial, and others. This deck was one of the primary reasons why cards like Trap Dust Shoot and Mind Crush became incredibly popular during the early to mid and of course into the later summer 2007 format. If your opponent activated Trap Dust Shoot in response to Advanced Ritual Arts, oftentimes they could rid you of the Demise that you were intending on summoning or the Doomdozer that you were intending on comboing with the Demise in order to actually pull off the OTK. Regardless of the hate that spawned during the summer of 2007, this was still an incredibly potent and scary deck. There were combinations of first turn draws that could enable OTKs and push through cards like Mirror Force and Sakuratsu Armor. You essentially needed something like Torrential or later on cards like Trap Dust Shoot in order to counteract. Demise being able to blow up the field for 2,000 life points enabled you to OTK with a variety of hands. As a result, this is really one of the best OTK decks during this phase of Yu-Gi-Oh's history. In my opinion, there's really different types of OTK decks. Some intend to draw your whole deck. This is really one of those first OTK decks that puts 8,000 damage on the field in a very consistent and streamlined, in some ways very linear fashion. This deck, unfortunately for fans of Demise OTK, once cards like Trap Dust Shoot and Mind Crush became essentially main deck staples, we saw this deck really push off to the side. You wouldn't see any copies of Demise in the top cut of the 2007 US Nationals and for the majority of the format. But certainly early on, particularly at its peak, winning the Shonen Jump Championship in California, Demise OTK is absolutely one of the most feared decks during the summer of 2007. But without further ado, let's take a deep dive look at Demise OTK. All right, so we'll start off with the deck's namesake. This is Demise OTK, so obviously we're going to run 3 copies of Demise King of Armageddon. At the end of the profile, once we talk about the cards, I'll actually talk about how this deck OTKs. But first, obviously, we're going to need Demise. Every primary OTK starts with Demise, and then, of course, we're going to have 3 copies of Doomdozer. Doomdozer, it's not necessary for every OTK, but it's usually instrumental. It's part of the more simplistic OTKs, which we'll talk about. So 3 Demise, 3 Doomdozer. 2 cards actually released in the same set. Then, because we're running an Advanced Ritual Arts deck, we need a lot of normal monsters, at least a reasonable amount of them. We have all of the strongest insect normal monsters. We have, for level 4s, Insect Knight, 3 copies, and then 1 Neobug. These are the strongest level 4 insects that we need. And then 1 level 8, this is the strongest level 8 insect monster. It makes it so that with Advanced Ritual Art, if we've drawn into all our level 4s, we always have at least a plan B, send a level 8 in order to summon Demise. Though typically, in a perfect world, we're sending Neobug and Insect Knight, 2 level 4 monsters in order to summon Demise. So a fleet of normal monsters to ensure that, more often than not, our Advanced Ritual Art is live. From that point on, we just have a large collection of searchers. We, of course, have 3 copies of Manju of the 10,000 Hands. This is the best one because it can search Advanced Ritual Art and it can search Demise. We have only 2 copies of Senju. Again, this one is limited to only searching Demise, but oftentimes that's really good. And then a couple copies of Sonic Bird in order to search Advanced Ritual Art. So the deck is really quite simple. It's OTK pieces, normals for Advanced Ritual Art, searchers to get to our OTK pieces. Very straightforward monster lineup. Next, we'll talk about the spell lineup. Cards in our spell lineup are either Spell and Trap Destruction, OTK Enablers, or cards that prolong the game. So first we have OTK Enablers, or cards that are explicitly necessary to OTK, the first of which is, of course, Advanced Ritual Art. Virtually every OTK begins by sending either 2 level 4s or Insect Metal, Armor Bug, I think it's called, the level 8 insect, in order to Advanced Ritual Art OTK with Demise. So 3 copies of Advanced Ritual Art, In terms of cards that are necessary to OTK, you don't necessarily need both of them, but often you do want Megamorph or Metamorphosis, because all of the monsters that we're special summoning off Advanced Ritual Art and then plus Doomdozer are level 8. Having access to Metamorphosis ensures that we can go into Cyber Twin Dragon. Megamorph also combines with Doomdozer in order to deal 8,000 damage. I'll talk a little bit about those OTKs once we get to that point at the end of the video. So just trust me, Metamorph or Metamorphosis, Megamorph or Metamorphosis are essential in the OTKs, plus Doomdozer. Then we have some sort of one-ups, some spell and trap card destruction. This deck would love to push through back rows using some cards like Mystical Space Typhoon, Trunade, or Heavy Storm. Granted, Demise's effect pops the board, so if your opponent's relying on Sakuratsu Armor and Mirror Force, it's not going to do anything. This, though, can push through something like Torrential Tribute. Then we have some more OTK enablers. We have Snatch Steal and Premature Burial. Some of the more unorthodox OTKs sometimes rely on these. Premature Burial works really well when you send a level 8 normal monster. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those OTKs. And then Scapegoat seems a little odd, but stalls out. Again, cards in our spell and trap lineup are either OTK enablers, spell and trap removal, or a way of prolonging the game, which Scapegoats can do. So that's our spell lineup. Then in terms of our trap lineup, we have 3 copies of Jar of Greed. This deck can't really run Upstart Goblin because the combos are actually virtually always exactly 8,000 damage. There are a few that are a little bit more, but this deck can't really rely on Upstart Goblin. So to bring our deck down to 37, we're going to run 3 copies of Jar of Greed. David Rodriguez, who top 8'd the Shonen Jump in California during this format, where Demise won. He didn't win, but Demise OTK did win. Elected to run 3 copies of Jar of Greed. This wasn't staple, but I liked the Jar of Greed versions. Then David elected to run some burn trap cards. So 1 copy of Magic Cylinder and 1 copy of Ring of Destruction. So Ring of Destruction is basically a staple in most decks. This deck, yeah, it's removal. The burn in this deck is weird because in a perfect world, you're OTKing, you're dealing 8,000 damage, you're moving on. But when you play 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 rounds, you go into the top cut, you know that some games you just kind of need to muster together 8,000 damage. And sometimes you can push with Demise, deal a good chunk of damage, and then have to find the other damage somewhere. Magic Cylinder and Ring of Destruction give you that reach, the ability to deal 8,000 damage when the full OTK doesn't go through because your opponent has a piece of interaction. So a couple burn traps. He also sided into actual burn with Secret Barrel and Ojama Trio. I've elected to build a different type of side deck, but it helped his particular version because these burn cards are obviously really good when you side into burn. Then we have Gravity Bind, which helps prolong the game. Torrential Tribute and Mirror Force would seem a little bit out of place, but they're really good, obviously, board wipes. And in this format, there isn't an exhaustive amount of extended, so a card like Torrential Tribute just buys you time. It's also good in the mirror match because you can Torrential when they summon Demise, call priority, pay 2,000, you chain Torrential, at least clears the Demise. You might still lose, but it might at least, in some cases, buy you an extra turn. Before I talk about the side deck and the decks at the time, let's talk about what this deck is actually trying to do. Like, what are the OTKs and how easy are they to accomplish? Well, all of the OTKs basically center around Demise and then Doomdozer. So when you activate Advanced Ritual Art, which again isn't that difficult, you have 3 copies, 2 Sonic Birds, and 3 Manjus. When you activate Advanced Ritual Art, you send to the graveyard one of 2 things. You either just send a level 8 insect, or you send a combination of 2 level 4 insects. It really kind of depends on the rest of your hand. From that point on, Demise hits the field, and then you have the option of paying 2,000 to board wipe. Make it so that Demise is the only card on the field. That's obviously useful. In a perfect world, you're playing Trunade or Heavy Storm and not risking your opponent having Torrential, but you could just generate card advantage by doing that. There were games where you had to actually play a little bit more of a long game, as opposed to just having the OTK every time. But Demise hits the board, you pay 2,000, the board is clear except Demise. Then you can banish the 2 insects that were sent to the graveyard to summon Doomdozer. Well, this isn't enough to OTK. It's only 5,300 points of damage. Where is the remaining coming from? Well, that's where some of our other cards come into effect. Metamorphosis here on the Demise results in us special summoning, and yeah, I'm technically jumping ahead to the side for the extra deck here a little bit, or the fusion deck, but that turns into Cyber Twin Dragon. Well, Cyber Twin plus Doomdozer, that is over 8,000. So, to go back to this, the 4 cards we need to OTK are 2 very searchable cards, right? Demise and Advanced Ritual Art are not difficult to get multiple copies of, to get even a single copy of with all our searchers, plus naturally drawing them. Doomdozer and Metamorphosis are admittedly not cards you can search out, But again, that's your game plan. So hopefully you eventually get to a point early in the game where you do get a combination of this. But that's not the only way. Let's go back a little bit. Same position, Advanced Ritual Arts, sending some insects. It's on the board. Now we've summoned Doomdozer. Are there other ways? Yeah. We have 3 copies of Megamorph. If you equip Megamorph to Doomdozer and attack directly with Doomdozer, it deals 5,600 points of damage exactly. This is likely now going to be dropped in attack, but that doesn't matter because now your opponent's at exactly 24, which means Demise, King of Armageddon, attacking directly exactly kills them. Meaning that this combination is a perfect 8,000 OTK. I talked a little bit earlier about why you can't really run Upstart Goblin in this deck. Which means, yes, we need one of these 2 very easy cards to access, and then Doomdozer plus either Megamorph or Metamorphosis. Both of them work. Well, what if there's a little bit of a different situation? Are there other ways of OTKing? Yeah, of course. Let's say instead of these 2, we have a card like Premature Burial. All right, well, let's say we don't have Doomdozer. We have these 2 plus a combination of 2 here. Well, what can we do? Instead of sending 2 insects, we can send the big level 8 as opposed to the 2, because when we premature this, it's a 2,800. And now from this point, if you metamorphosis it, or rather metamorphosis Demise or megamorph this, those are both going to deal over 8,000 damage, which means Advanced Ritual Arts plus Demise plus premature and another combo piece is also enough to deal enough damage to win. All right, let's see, can we go even further? Of course we can. It's really easy. This might seem a little bit difficult, but it's actually really easy to summon 2 Demises in one turn if you actually were to play this deck. Because the way the deck works, you're always searching. So Demise 1 comes out, clears the board. Advanced Ritual Art 2 activates, and now your field is double Demise. Well, that's 4,800 points of damage. From that point, if you metamorphosis the second Demise, turn it into a Cyber Twin Dragon, that's winning without even accessing Doomdozer. Or maybe you have Premature Burial. Well, 2 Demises on the board, plus a Premature Burial. It's not going to be quite enough to kill your opponent, but it's going to be really close because now when you activate Premature Burial, you can recur back to level 8. And again, it's not quite 8,000 damage, but like I alluded to a moment ago, it's pretty dang close. It gets you close to OTKing. And then honestly, all you need from that point is a copy of any of the searchers. So for example, you summon Demise, pop the field, summon a second Demise. Now you summon any searcher, which is more than likely going to be in your hand, right? There are 8 copies of them in your deck. And now you just bring this back off for premature, and then that deals enough damage. The textbook basic OTKs that when people think about this deck are ones that involve Advanced Ritual Arts, 1 Demise, 1 Spell, and Doomdozer. Those are the simplistic, just clear-cut OTKs that everybody is aware of. These 3 plus 1 of these. However, there are a variety of other ways of OTKing, plus this deck has Ring of Destruction. You can replace some of these OTKs with Ring of Destruction. Like, for example, you advance Ritual Art Demise, you attack with both of these, and then you just Ring of Destruction your own Doomdozer on the next turn. Well, that's the same thing as Megamorphing your Doomdozer. That's enough to beat your opponent. So there are a lot of out-of-the-blue ways that you can just deal 8,000 damage, and honestly, just summoning Demise and passing is sometimes reasonable. It might not seem like that because you think modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Your opponent's just going to break your board, but this is old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Dealing with Demise isn't a guarantee. Your opponent needs to tribute summon for a Zaborg or Brain Control and tribute it for a Cyber Dragon. It's not a guarantee, and when you actually look at how many cards in this deck are OTK enablers, there is a huge density of cards. Like, imagine sometimes where your opponent has no back rows and you clear your opponent's back rows and you advance Ritual Art Demise and then just Snatch Steal. Or imagine early in the game, you just Snatch Steal a Monarch and attack for 24. And then that in and of itself, maybe you combine that with a Metamorphosis, your opponent doesn't gain life and you chipped away. Or early in the game, your opponent attacked directly and you got them with a Magic Cylinder. Now the threshold for dealing 8,000 damage is much, 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 much lower. You don't actually need 4 cards. Sometimes just advance Ritual Art Demise, Doomdozer is enough. So yes, there is that clear-cut OTK, advance Ritual Arts Demise, Doomdozer, plus a spell. But when you actually play this deck, you'll find a ton of games are won in unorthodox ways. But that is our Demise OTK main deck. In terms of the fusion deck, we need, as many copies of Cyber Twin as you want. It wasn't a particularly expensive card. You could throw in other level 8s. This one has Piercing, maybe Gatling Dragon. you don't necessarily always have the ability to pay 2,000 off Demise, so having some of these utility ones, like Gatling Dragon, could clear the board if you needed. And you should have level 4 ones, like Dark Flare Dragon, in order to make it so that the Manju and Senjus and Sonic Birds can bump up to 15 as opposed to 14, because again, we're running Metamorphosis. Plus you have Snatch Steal, so you technically should have just about every level. There's no reason not to. I made comments earlier about Snatch Stealing a Monarch and making it so they don't gain life, so you do need level 6s or level 5s in that case. So I have a small fleet of fusion monsters here, but this is a time period where your fusion deck can just be infinite. So make sure you, if you were to play this deck, to have an extra deck that would compensate for the fact that you sometimes need a variety of levels because you run Snatch Steal. In terms of the decks at the time, before we talk a little bit about the side deck that I put together, we have DDT, a deck that at the beginning of the format, not a lot of people considered top tier. Chris Perovic very quickly showed that it still was. By the time Nationals rolled around, the limitation on Magical Stone made that deck less popular, but nevertheless, we have Hero Beat, Little City. I'll talk a little bit about this deck in the future. This is on the list of decks that are coming. But Little City based on Ocean, and then of course Skyscraper number 2. We have machine variants. There are a variety of machine variants. In many ways, the machine variants that utilize Trap Dust Shoot is one of the main reasons why this deck, the Demise deck, lost popularity. There's very few things in life that are as enjoyable from the machine beatdown player's perspective as chaining Dust Shoot or Mind Crush to advance Ritual Art and making it fizzle, or making it so that it doesn't resolve. Of course, we have variations of Monarch decks. I'll represent Perfect Circle Monarch with these 3 cards. So we're talking about a deck that tries to utilize Disc Commander and Fearmonger with Monarchs. We profiled that deck. There's also a variety of Monarch decks at the time, some with the Apprentice Engine, some without. So we talked about Adam Korn's deck on this channel, so variety of Monarch decks. Beginning of the format, we had Trooper Bazoo decks. Throughout the format, we had Gadget decks. Really successful at Shonen Jump Montreal. I talked about this before, but they were burn decks. Maybe eventually we'll talk about a burn deck profile. We, of course, have T-Hero. We have Diamond Dude Turbo. I actually already talked about that one. And then just good stuff decks with DD Assailant, DD Warrior Ladies, Cyber Dragons, Monarch, Smash and Ground, Sakuratsu Armor. Decks that don't seem to have as clear of a game plan as some of the other decks that existed at the time, though could still sometimes top a Shonen Jump. For Demise OTK, similar to DDT, I think your side deck should focus on silver bullets for matchups that might be difficult. So for example, burn decks. We're going to side 3 Death Wombats, just like DDT, right? You want to have this pseudo guaranteed win. Same thing with Decree. Now Decree is a little bit interesting with this one because the best way of counteracting this deck is with Trap Dust Shoot and Mind Crush. And if you go first, you can set roll Decree and then obviously activate it when they try and Dust Shoot you. Even going second, it's still pretty good. It makes it so that you can push with your Demise OTK without having to rely on the hope that your opponent doesn't have any chainable cards like Torrential Tribute or even in some cases Ring of Destruction. So I liked having Decree in the side deck. I basically always sided it in. A card that was interesting that I think you always needed to side. Now, if you were going to side into a different kind of deck, David Rodriguez did that at the Shonen Jump California, where he sided into entirely burn. I'm talking like just desserts level burn. But I would want either Contract with the Abyss or the End of the World. The reason why you needed to have this card in your side deck, if you were intending on winning with Demise in game 2 and 3 and not totally changing your deck, is that one of the best outs to this OTK was Curse Seal, the Forbidden Soul. Right? Your opponent flips Curse Seal. When you activate Advanced Ritual Arts, they negate it. And now for the rest of the game, you can't activate Advanced Ritual Arts. Well, how are you going to win? Highly unlikely that you're going to find a way to win without putting Demise on the board. You're basically now a Doom Dozer beatdown deck with some normal insects. Doesn't sound very good. If you have one single copy of End of the World in your deck, you still have backdoor ways of winning. I actually played this deck as a young child at the Shonen Jump in Montreal, and I'll never forget a game where my Advanced Ritual Art was hit by Curse Seal, but I had sided in the End of the World, and I just activated it, pitched an in-hand insect, an onboard Manju, summoned Demise, and proceeded to still OTK. So having this counteracted one of the most common side deck plans against your deck. I like potentially having access to Level Limit Area B. It's a card that's a little bit difficult to use because it makes it so that your Demise enters the field in defense mode, which can sometimes slow down your OTK. But if you plan on winning with Metamorphosis with Doom Dozer, you can just Metamorphosis the Demise, which you typically do anyway, and then it doesn't matter that it came in defense. So I liked having more access to some stall cards. This card might seem a little bit weird in this deck because you're thinking, well, this is an OTK deck. Do I really care if my opponent's generating card advantage with Monarchs? This card slows down Monarchs a lot. If they flip it to Koichi and tribute for a Monarch and you hit him with pulling the rug, that's going to buy you 1, maybe 2, 3 draw phases, right? A Monarch deck's not going to immediately OTK you. I liked having access to a card like pulling the rug, and it's actually incredible in the mirror match too, because you can hit all the searchers early on. Obviously, it's not going to hit Demise or some of those cards, but in the first couple of turns, when your opponent's sculpting their hand, searching out those OTK pieces, you hit them with pulling the rug, clears it out, makes it so their search is cut off, and you can stymie them. And it's also technically good against gadgets, though. I think with gadgets, playing the advantage game against a gadget summon is probably not the best way of doing it. And then to me, this wasn't necessarily overwhelmingly popular, but when this deck really got super popular, I would have had a lot of cards in my side deck for the mirror match. I think the Dust Shoot Mind Crush plan is one of the best because you chain this to advance Ritual Arts unless they're holding double Demise or even double Doom Dozer. What I mean by that is if their hand is Demise, Doom Dozer, Demise, right? 2 copies of Demise and Doom Dozer, just take the Doom Dozer and they can't OTK you, right? With Trap Dust Shoot. And then if they have Demise and you just call it off Mind Crush, you're guaranteed to hit as many copies as they happen to have. So this package was really hard to play against unless you sided in Decree. And siding in Decree in the mirror match just sounds miserable. So I really liked this package. The popularity of this package in the main deck of Monarchs, of Little City, of Machine Beatdown, maybe Perfect Circle to a lesser extent, Gadget anti-meta decks, made it so that Demise had its fun early on. Absolutely won a Shonen Jump early on. But as the format progressed, its popularity started to wane when it was really hard for Demise OTK players to play through these trap cards. They started to have to main Decree, which means now we're taking out cards like the Jar of Greed package, which slows the deck down. We're trying to OTK a turn off if they just hit you with Dust Shoot early on because they don't know that they're playing against Demise, but they take your only searcher. It really slows you down. I mean, it just made it miserable. It made it so that you essentially had to add another piece to your OTK where you needed Decree and Advanced Ritual Arts and Demise and Doom Dozer and Metamoy. It made it so that you essentially needed a 5th card to OTK once the popularity of these 4 cards really hit their peak. But nevertheless, that's a look at the Demise OTK deck from the summer of 2007. It's Joe Giorlando for Yu-Gi-Oh! History. Thank you for watching. Check back soon for plenty more Yu-Gi-Oh! content.